Okay, I'm here with Thupa, and we are talking Hades. We're going to talk Supergiant games in general as well, but we're starting with Hades. Thupa, do you like Hades?
Clap check.
Oh. Yep, clap check. I also have video of you, so I can sync it that way. But Thupa,
Oh, God
everyone
damn
in...
it.
But you're the one who left it on. Thupa, everyone in the world likes Hades. Do you like Hades?
I like Hades, although my experience with it is a little unorganized, I would say, because here's the thing. I like roguelike games. I do. I play through them, but I never like to repeat them as much, because here's the thing. Once I've beat a game, I want to move on to something next. And the thing with Hades, once I beat... spoilers, Hades, guess what I did? I moved on with the game. And there's apparently a bunch of shit behind it. Like, there's like a true ending and stuff, and they hinted it, and they tell you that, sure, go above, like, fucking beat Hades again to see more cutscenes, but I never returned for that, and I don't even remember if that part even was in the game when I played it. Because here's the thing now with Hades. The way it was released is via early access service. For example, when I really got into the game, it didn't even have Hades. I don't think it even had the icy floor beyond the Minotaur boss fight. Christ, I'm bad with names. And now there's Greek mythos.
I think Theseus. Theseus
Yes.
and the Minotaur.
Theseus and the Minotaur. God.
Yeah, the worst character and the almost best character right next to each other.
Fucking Theseus is a piece of shit.
It's almost a meta. It's almost a meta joke because Hades makes a fourth wall break almost at one point, and I mean Hades the god, where Zagreus jokes and says, "What, you couldn't get Heracles? You couldn't get him? You could only get Theseus, could you? Because everyone hates you down here." And Hades gets all pissed, saying, "Hercules should be in fucking hell. It's only because Greek mythology is fucking bullshit and has no concept of morality that he's not there to begin with. Be lucky that you got Theseus, shut up." And that's almost a fourth wall break where they went out of their way to get just a barely obscure hero to be there, because you are totally expecting to run into someone more famous once you get through Elysium, and then no, it's just Theseus and the bull of all people.
Here's another thing though, the thing with development of this game was that a bunch of shit was suggested by the community as the game was released in its early stages, in early access. The studio paid very close attention, and since this was heavily based in Greek mythos, guess what? Everybody likes Greek mythos, and they have more gods than I have. Fingers, pictures of cute anime girls, and porn in my stash, which is to say there are too many gods in Greek mythos.
And the funny thing there is, I guarantee you those categories overlap a bit.
Yeah, those probably do. They were a horny bunch of people. Well, gods, not exactly people, but horny bunch of entities. So, the thing with it is that a lot of people would suggest them gods. There was for a while not a petition, but a community sentiment where they wanted this goddess of rainbows to be in the game. And as much as I know, it's literally just a chick that makes rainbows. She doesn't even do much anything else. And the community just wanted her.
Well, in Greek and Roman mythology, there was almost no difference between there being a concept or a word, almost, and it being a god. So there are plenty of myths where a complete bullshit god that no one's heard of will show up, do one thing, then disappear. So basically every concept you have, you can figure out something like that.
Man, imagine the guise of a god of spoiling rice. That's just all he does. He just shows up and just makes your rice shitty and stale.
I mean, there's probably someone who would do something like that. About
Well,
the
yeah,
Greek
I call him my
mythology
roommate.
thing. Oh.
He's no
Okay.
god though. He just leaves shit out of the fridge. God damn it.
Oh, okay. This is just complaining. This is the complaining about our roommates podcast. I'll say mine after I've been quarantining very diligently was looking like it was going to be one of those things where it's like, oh, even though we're all vaccinated, I don't know if you should leave the house. And it was like, great, I'll just hang myself due to deprivation. About the Greek mythology thing, how do you think that worked as an aesthetic? Because to an extent, it's done to death in video games, especially certain kinds. But it also feels like this was a really smart application of it, and much smarter than usual. Where something like God of War, it was really fun, but it required a lot of stitching together to make sense. This is a case where the aesthetic and gameplay really seem to work together, I think.
Well, here's the thing. Supergiants are proficient at fitting both aesthetic and gameplay together. Like, not even gameplay, like style more so than anything. If you look at their previous works and like this game, which is basically their crown achievement, summarizing all of their experiences from game development before, there's a lot that they did right in the minute detail from thing to thing. I remember, like, for example, they wanted to make a gun for the game, which they did. There's like this fucking arbalest shooting shit thing that I hate to use, because you have to stand where you shoot anyway. So they were making a gun for the game, and they were specifically looking for a way to make the gun look or feel realistic. But they couldn't come up with a proper animation loop for the gun. So what they did is they initially were hoping to make it something where you float while you shoot so that it would look more real, but it would feel kind of side-scrolly. And while they tried that, in many ways, it just felt like it didn't have enough grounding in the reality. So they went with a different approach where they traded mobility for better damage and basically a more skillful high risk, high reward approach, making what it ended up being in the end.
The gun is sort of openly stupid, but it almost baits you in, where it becomes the weapon that is really good for the high heat. It's the high skill gap weapon, where when the gun is doing well, you do so much damage with it, and you can blow through levels so quickly. But when the gun is doing poorly, it's just frustrating to use and clunky, and that almost becomes a meta joke, because they acknowledge in-universe the gun doesn't really make sense existing. Even Achilles has a line where he goes, "Oh God, I'm so lucky guns didn't exist when I was alive, because I would have just been shot once and died." And because he was Achilles and he had his heel thing, if Paris had had a gun, that would have been a much shorter story. It's a lot easier to snipe.
Imagine her with a Glock.
But about the Greek mythology thing, the only video I watched about this was I think Super Bunny Hop. He made a case that the aspect of repeating things endlessly and a sort of quasi-existential mentality where things are pointless and there's a sense of grinding and futility and slowly building towards something that never really changes. He made the point that that aspect of Greek mythology, and especially some of the punishments that people experience in hell, works really well with a roguelike. And that was one thing that a commenter said that really stuck with me, where the aspect of repeating things, Greek mythology is such a good place, because a recurring thing in ancient mythology is people will have bizarre relationships that, if they were humans, would end in a fight or murder and then would just be over. But in the context of Greek mythology, because everyone is immortal, it just keeps going forever and ever and ever. And people have the shittiest relationships imaginable, but they just don't end. And that's part of what makes Hades so fun to me, is when you go through, like, Zagreus and the final boss of the game are just hanging out in the house all the time, knowing that they're going to fight again in 15 minutes.
Also, what really works in this game are the puns, because, god fucking damn it, Medusa. They made Medusa a Medusa. God, it's... When I caught it, oh my god, it was a joy.
Well, that starts good, then you get the fishing rod, and every other room they make you stop and fish for things like a kacharp.
Kacharp.
It gets really lazy at some point. They just put CHT in front of existing fish and make you fish for them.
Here's the thing. Never done that. Wasn't even in the game that I played. That's a bit of a difficulty with early access games. It's like, we've played the same game, but we've played different versions of it, where it's difficult to say.
It is, and that is an aspect of Hades that is frustrating. You really get the impression that they added things without really thinking it through or considering where it's going to go, where as much fun as Hades can be, in a lot of places it does not feel like a cohesive final product, or it feels very slapdash. For example, the lounge. Upgrading the lounge is almost pointless, but early on in the game you assume that it's going to serve a purpose, and it takes you quite a while to realize, oh, this is mostly cosmetic. It doesn't really serve a gameplay aspect.
Here's the thing with that. It is optional, and while it is cosmetic, cosmetics are a part of the game, and a very important one at that. If you have influence over your environment in video game or your hub, it may not influence your further gameplay into the run, but it's something that you invest time in, it's something you can just buy because you like, or something that you think a character in this world will like, or maybe give you a dialogue option because of that. That is more than enough reason for some people to, like, really grind specifically for this shit. Because cosmetics in themselves are incentive enough to play the game. It's not for everybody, but it's good to have that option.
Yeah, and about the cosmetics, such a big part of the appeal of Hades is the design, the color palette, the aesthetic. And part of that is the Supergiant art style, which they arguably do sort of have one. It really gets good with Hades, where the levels are so well planned, the art is so finely crafted. There's just enough variety between set pieces that you get used to them without getting bored of them. I will say at times the gameplay gets boring or a little repetitive, but the visuals and especially the music of Hades is really good.
Darren Corp is a mad genius. God damn, that man is good.
Who is Dark Corp?
Darren Corp is the composer. He's also the voice of Old Man in Bastion, because if you've played Bastion, you've heard that motherfucker. He composes music, he talks in the video game, he's actually, I believe, the voice of Zagreus himself as well.
Oh, wait, really?
I believe so, yes.
That's a lot of range. Because Zagreus does not have a high voice, but he has a very youthful, lilting voice in a way, and the narrator from Bastion is this booming.
Yeah, actually,
voice.
Now that I remember, no, it was a different person in the Bastion. He then later narrated character in Transistor, and I think done some audio work on Pyre, but I'm not sure as to what length in Pyre. But no explicit voice work. In Hades, I think he does Hades, not Zagreus. Zagreus is just Darren Korb, who composes music. But his voice has been also in other games.
Hades would make more sense.
Voice work in these games has gone through a lot of iterations. They've definitely experimented with it a lot, where in Bastion, you have this person narrating basically all of your actions. Like, you have a narrator, a DM just looking at you and commenting on the shit you do, or making it into a small story. Like, you break a bunch of boxes, he says that you broke a bunch of boxes. You're going somewhere into a level and you're about to have an encounter, he tells you what encounter you're about to have. And then comments a little on the creatures that you're going to fight. And then says that you did a good job, or that you, barely got out of it. Where in Transistor, it switches around. From having this godlike world, they basically stuff the narrator into Transistor, literally, and you lug him around, and he's more of a character in the world than anywhere else, probably. He's probably going through more than Red herself. Which is, frankly, having a mute character, that's fascinating to me.
In that case, I think that was almost a mistake. Talking about Supergiant a little bit, I went back a bit after playing Hades. I did not complete all the previous Supergiant games. I played a significant amount of most of them. And an aspect that you really get from looking at their back catalog is they use these same motifs over and over and over again, and they evolve as they go from game to game. I will say, all these Supergiant trademarks work together better in Hades than they did in the previous games, but I don't think it's a linear climb upwards from the early games to Hades, where, for example, I think the narrator in Pyre was significantly better than the narrator in either Transistor or especially Hades, but every single Supergiant game has the comedy omniscient narrator guy.
Well, I think they kind of combined the two, didn't they? They took this narrator that knows everything about the world, that has a bird's eye view on it, and then they stuffed him into a small secluded area where he would talk to you, but otherwise would not interfere with your gameplay. Like, as you go through your daily life in Pyre, the narrator isn't there. You have text. It's a text adventure, or fucking basically a visual novel at that point. But then once you get into the rides, there you go, there's your narrator.
Yes, although in Pyre I think it's a lot better used, partially because the narrator is a lot more funny, where the narrator does get a few quips in Hades, and they do a kind of fourth wall break, but for the most part it's just straightforward. And he doesn't show up all that much, really. Where in Pyre, not only is he very, very funny, but they eventually get into the lore with him, and you realize there's actually more going on with the narrator than just the auspices of a video game trope, which I found pretty interesting.
There's usually a lot going in these games lore-wise. I think I absolutely adore Pyre, and it's probably my favorite game by a long shot out of the entire catalog of Supergiants, including Hades. But the one game that really went nuts on the lore is definitely the shortest one of the bunch. It's the Transistor one. Boy, does that game may seem like an action RPG, but it's actually a text RPG because it's hidden there. That is so much.
Getting into Supergiant in general, to just give a very quick overview of the different games. Their first game was Bastion, which I only played a small amount of, but just to speak to the continuity, I played the first level of Bastion, which came out as a demo, I think when I was 15, and when I went to play Hades, which was the first Supergiant I played since then, when I used... Yeah, I know. When I used the bow... When I used the fucking bow in Hades, it triggered a memory where it reminded me of the bow weapon in Bastion. Where where the Supergiant tropes, some of them are so ingrained that there's that much continuity. Where me playing a game for half an hour 10 years ago, I can recognize the same person made Hades this much later. I didn't play Bastion, but
wasn't there a perk in Hades where you could throw your sword?
I think there are a lot of thrown weapons in Hades. I don't think the sword, but
like with sword, I think you could strike and you could like launch it, but it like, still remains in your hands.
The spear can do that, and so can the shield.
Oh right, and you can also do triple hit with a spear as well. I think that has some callback to the fucking katana in Bastion as well, because that you could throw and then you could throw like 3 of them in that arc.
I won't get too into it, but I'll ask you about Bastion in a second because I remember Bastion so poorly. But just to give a very simple overview of the Supergiant thing, the early was Bastion. Later they did Transistor, which is a artsy kind of very polished cyberpunk story that has some aesthetics of, I would say, the 1920s. Kind of old futuristic thing where you are someone with a lost voice going through a techno world with a sword that contains the soul of someone and trying to do whatever it was she was doing. I didn't get to the end. Pyre is a very mystical game with a lot of mystical imagery where you are thrown into and banished into this under dimension full of crazy monsters and mythical creatures, and you have to play magic mystical basketball with people to try to win your freedom and get your soul up. And there's a bunch of visual novel elements where you meet a wacky cast of characters, and then you get the Hades. Bastion, I remember it as your city was destroyed and you're trying to restart it. Is it very quickly, can you summarize the idea behind Bastion?
Bastion is basically summarized like this. There was a world, one day you wake up, you don't see anything around you other than this floating island, and it turns out the calamity has happened. The world has literally ended and is now reduced to these small floating islands in nothingness. And you're trying to go back to Bastion and restart it and rebuild it and discover a way to live in this new world or reverse it in some kind of way.
Okay, yeah, that's straightforward. Talking lore, every Supergiant game does have this lore behind it. Hades almost doesn't, because Hades is cheating, because Hades' lore is just Greek mythology. So that they don't really have to do that. That might be why Hades is so gameplay intensive compared to the rest of the Supergiant games, because so much of the lore was pre-built. Maybe that freed them up to focus on the mechanics a little more.
I wouldn't say that. They just like to make a different game and they like to challenge themselves a lot as a studio. And their Bastion was like an action RPG. Then they decided that they wanted to make something more difficult, something more stylized, that they made Transistor, which was actually
more difficult, though?
It was much more difficult for them because they wanted to incorporate a lot of the elements from the game, but they wanted from their first game, but they wanted to incorporate them in a different manner, and they wanted to change up the mechanics, and they wanted to expand on the combat and give you a lot of versatility in how you tackle it, because Bastion had a very streamlined combat system. It's very simplistic. You have 2 weapons, you have a special in your weapon, and you have like some minor upgrades to your weapons, and that's basically it. The variety comes from enemies there afterwards, and even that is negligible, honestly. Bastion, combat-wise, is very simple game. When you come to Transistor, where you can create insane combos, which you can have 4 on your hotbar, and every ability has 3 states: being active, being a passive in another ability, being a literal passive for your character, and you can have two passives on your one active ability, meaning which interact between each other as well. So if you have like a split function and you have a parasite function on your dodge, then now when you dodge, you don't spawn a single parasite, you spawn a bunch of parasites, which would be a different thing if you just did it without each other.
I don't know if I like the gameplay and the combat in Transistor nearly as much as you do. Where I think this is a big problem with Supergiant is I think the gameplay is generally good and the story is good, but I feel like they're generally not very well used relative to each other. And I would say Hades was the big turnaround with that. Where
Here's the thing. I want to interrupt you here because I find combat in Transistor a good novelty. I enjoy it, but I don't particularly like it. It is a vehicle in that game to get to more story. Because here's the thing about functions in that game. Functions are literally people. That parasite function, split function, ping function, dodge function, your abilities are literally people that you slot into your blade called Transistor. And the thing with them is that when you use that function in a particular way, it unlocks a story blob about that person. For example, you use your dodge as active, you get a bit of story about that person. Then you use your dodge as a passive, you get a little more story about that person. Then you use it as a sub-function for an active function. You get another story blob. And now you have like a complete story of a character through using the ability in different ways. And that is fascinating to me.
Okay, that is part of my problem, where with Supergiant, so often it feels like they are rationing out the story, which they're actually good at, and they're forcing you to play game. They just make things difficult for no reason. Or they ration out the information feed using gameplay in a way that really isn't worth it. Where in Transistor, Transistor, I think the characters just aren't nearly as good. I think the blurbs about the people, okay.
I find them fascinating because
I don't.
It is this gritty noir apocalypse story fit into a sci-fi environment where there's a city of Cloudbank and people can pretty much decide anything about the city on a whim and just vote it into existence.
Awesome, but why do I have to play gimmicky little mini games to get that?
You don't! Here's the thing, if you want the main story of the game, you can get it by just playing the game. But then if you're interested in how this happens, you kind of have to read those side things, like, what are they called? Terminals. There are a bunch of terminals to the side. And when you interact with those terminals, they give you a little bit of extra. For example, Red is a silent protagonist. Her voice is stolen from her at the very beginning of the game. She doesn't speak a single word until the literal credits after them. And the single word she says in the entire game is, hey. However, as a completely mute character, she has so much personality because here's the thing, when you read that little terminal blurb, what it usually has is like comment on it, like a button. And what she will do is, when you press that comment button, she will type out a bunch of shit like she's talking to Transistor, a person in the sword. And she will have like a little dialogue with him, and then she will write something and try to post it there. And you get like a lot from that, and you get a lot from those small cutscenes that they intervene and how she interacts with the world around her in small ways. You can hum in Transistor. There's no relevant gameplay reason other than starting a boss fight the first thing they give you an option to do that. But you can just, at any point in the game, you can just stand and just have her hum to the background music, which changes it totally slightly, and then she hums to it, and it's beautiful. It's completely unnecessary, but it's beautiful, and it just gives so much character.
I'll take your word for that, but about the gameplay thing, at times with Transistor, I almost felt like a lot of people felt with Soma. It felt like the gameplay was interrupting what was good about the game rather than being an actively interesting part of it, where I never really enjoyed the combat in Transistor that much, where I will say this, of the 3 Supergiant games I played, Transistor is easily the one that suffers the least from a feeling of bloat, where Transistor is a very linear story. Every place you go, there's details, the aesthetics are a little bit different, stuff is happening. Unlike Hades, where you play it until you die and you're just chipping away, and unlike Pyre, which wastes your time with a lot of shit, Transistor is very efficient in giving you what it has to offer, and I'll give it that, but the combat pretty consistently felt to me like, okay, we were going through the street, our sword guy with the deep voice was telling fun stories about how we used to come here to drink before he got dyed and turned into a sword. And then a little game comes up where you have to fight guys for 3 minutes, and then we're back to the stuff that's actually good. And in Transistor, I never really felt like combat was progress. It always felt like it almost felt like I should have just been walking through the levels, getting the world building tidbits, and it just should have been a showpiece or a movie.
It is actually not an uncommon sentiment. A lot of people who came from Bastion to Transistor had a very similar opinion, where they wanted more dialogue, where the game explicitly shoves your narrator into a role of a character, then robs him of any agency, and then makes fun of it with a story. It's kind of genius.
It is, but I still... In Transistor, combat never felt like progress. And I will say this about Hades. Hades, combat feels like progress for a very big stretch of the game, although it eventually fucks up. And then in Pyre, combat does not always feel like progress, but combat is also fun and lighthearted in a way that works with the story and the world much more, I think.
Really?
It looks like you don't agree with me here.
Here's the thing about Supergiants. They are masters at incorporating story directly into gameplay. In Bastion, it was one of the last scenes where you save a person. For the sake of the spoilers, since you don't remember the game, I won't say it, but basically, it was one of the last scenes where you have to drag a person out of the place as you're getting shot at. And they incorporate the combat and gameplay there brilliantly. In Transistor, they literally build getting lore all about gameplay. And when you have that lore, it really colors your experience. And I think that they peaked with Pyre, because in Pyre, combat is a vessel for the story completely, and you are the one making the story. Because here's the thing, there were battles in Pyre that I lost intentionally because characters wanted me to.
I did not do that. That is interesting, though. I do agree with you that Pyre tends to be very good about it. The only issue with Pyre is this. Some of the fights are obviously a holding pattern, or they don't, to me, feel like they're going anywhere, where a significant portion of Pyre, basically once you get past the liberation bit and you're actively competing to send people out of Pyre, or you're competing to send people out of the underworld, whatever it's called, once you hit that point, it's obvious that they're dragging this out and they're having fights partially for character, but partially to make the game longer. And at that point, it starts to fall apart for me.
I don't know if I agree, because here's the thing. Once you get to the part where you get to choose who you fight, this is where the game really opened up for me, because as you go through your first liberation rite and your second liberation rite, which I want to talk about that separately, because that is fucking brilliant what they did with that. But once the game opens up and you like get to choose the fights, as you were going through your first one or two liberation rites, you had these small interactions with these teams separately, and they had remarks to one of the character or the other of the character. And now that you get to choose, it means you get to pre-select the character that you want to know more about, and then put them in a situation where you fight against a team that has most interactions with them. And you suddenly get a lot of small tidbits about the world, about these characters. And now, since we're here anyway, fuck it. The liberation rites are brilliant, because what they make you do is they make you select your favorite character, level them up the most, and then you have to liberate the characters that you have most investment in, which is brilliant.
I will say, that was a brilliant mechanic. I don't think they did enough with it to justify it, though. And part of the thing with the liberation arc in Pyre, where early on, Pyre tends to be very linear, and the fights are more story conceits in a way, although they always somewhat are. You hit a point in Pyre where you are actively trying to get your people out of this mystical demon realm, and you have to do it one by one. Once you hit that part, though, to me, it got so annoying, and I felt like so much of my time was being wasted, that it got really frustrating. And I understand the charm of these characters, but the combat in Pyre is fun, but I don't know if it's fun in a way where it justifies itself. To me, the combat in Pyre feels fun when it feels frivolous. Once things start feeling more serious, the combat is not as interesting. And the thing about Pyre's fucking loop is it takes way too long for the amount of information you get about characters. So even if the interactions you get are good, you get a few frames or a few paragraphs from them in a 15-minute chunk that also includes a fucking basketball game. And it's just so inefficient that it makes it hard for me to enjoy it. Where Transistor is the one Supergiant game that is very efficient, Pyre is probably the least, because it makes you watch so many animations and little cutscenes, and makes you take so long.
It's not efficient, but it's so gorgeous in a way that it does it, because every character has its own goddamn music theme. Every character has its own flourishes, and the game is so stylized. Like when they get happy, when they get happy, there's just like a blue towel that just floats behind them as they look at you smugly from their screen. It is so delightful in how it portrays things.
And here's the thing about Pyre. Supergiant games have an odd relationship to time, where Transistor is pretty set, pretty linear, pretty stable. Hades can theoretically go forever, and that's one of the big weaknesses of Hades. Pyre is strange, where you hit a point with Pyre where you more or less realize you have a set number of games that you have to play before you reach the final stage. And it's not about making progress with each game. It's about maximizing the odds of you getting the good ending as you chip away going through it. And I don't care if I'm wrong, because this is what they fucking tell you, Thupa. And you hit a stage in Pyre where it's basically, okay, you're going to have to play another 15 to 20 games, and we're going to repeat the exact same loop for every game until you get to that point. And you're just running out the clock. And in that context, watching all the little fluff and all the little animations, and Pyre makes you drive your fucking little chariot cart thing around every time you want to start a new story segment. And it made it really frustrating, because I knew we weren't really making progress. It was more we were running out the clock. And all the little fluff became way harder to deal with when it didn't feel like a forward progressing story anymore. And that's what really fucked me up with Pyre.
I treated this game completely different. It's this little fluff that I played it for, because
you played it to
I
watch
really
the fucking
liked,
cart roll around the 3D world.
Once later you get flying with that cart, and you can like bump into carts of different teams.
That was funny once.
I did it every time. And once I got into a map, I would fly all over the fucking map. Because there are little pockets of things that are hidden there, little interactables on that map that you can click on. And you just get a little blurb there, or they tell you a little bit of story about the world. And it was all so fascinating. Every time I would finish a day and I would get into an option where I could go around my wagon and talk to another person in it, I would always look for cobwebs to clear out. And I would just like obsessively click on every cobweb to get rid of it, because I just kept it clean. I would click on the fucking drive-ins way past the point where I found out every single one of them, because it just makes funny noises. Those things were explicitly there for me so I could feel immersed in the game, because I wasn't rushing anywhere. I was playing the game at my time, and I enjoyed every moment of it. Because every basketball game that we had, I played it because I wanted to progress the storyline with a character. And once I wasn't progressing the storyline with a character, I would get a payoff in the map, where I would get a little story, or a little item, or a little something, or a little game that I just invented for myself. And then I would end the day and I would talk to this character and they would give me more story.
That is the big split with us, where so much of it, I was there for the stories and character after a while, and to a lesser extent the aesthetic, because it's always good, but you do get used to the world after a while. I felt like what I liked in the game around when you hit the mid-game in Pyre became a very small minority of what was in the game, and other stuff was an impediment to it. Where the basketball games, they're not that fun. I think they're more fun early on, where there's a novelty and there's a lot of humor to it. But once you hit the point where you're trying to get through the games to get to the character interactions, which is where I was, it becomes annoying, because then the basketball games just become work.
They always throw a little bit of something into those games. Because different teams have different approaches to how they play. There are a bunch of different fields and different abilities that people use. Every game felt a little different to me, enough to make a difference where that it didn't get stale. And having an emotional connection to characters that were in play, that were talking back to me and telling me that, could you please do this? Or, I want to explicitly lose this game. Can we do that? Because I'm gonna give you more dialogue that way. It was fucking genius for me. And another thing, the gameplay at some point became there's like a plot to like overthrow some shit in the Commonwealth, to send people who would help the rebellion in the overworld. I didn't give a single flying fuck about that plan. I'll be entirely honest. It most certainly succeeded, because I ended up with like some high amount of percentage when I ended the game, but goddamn, at some point, I just sent Bertrude up top, which is like a fucking bog witch that hates everybody, and the idea of you sending her, she tells you, don't fucking do it. I will murder you in your sleep if you even attempt to send me to fucking Commonwealth up there. And it was so stupidly entertaining to me to just think, I'm gonna fuck with everybody. Oh, they're getting a fucking mutant-ass lizard woman sent back to them.
Okay, I'm gonna throw this out, because if you don't agree with this, I think we're just so far apart on this that we're not going to get anywhere. Did the fact that you...
Another quick thing.
Okay.
About the battles in the game. I don't know if it's relevant to your future comments, so I want to throw it in advance. Here's the thing. The further you get into the game, the more challenging the combat is, in general. And there are a couple of fights where I was really pushed. Like on higher difficulties, combat against like those black garbed axe Nightwings. God, it was brutal.
That's the thing about the combat. A thing about Pyre, and maybe this is me being a filthy casual who needs to get good. A thing about Pyre is the controls are squirrely in places. They're not always super intuitive. Passing with spacebar, maybe I'm just retarded, but that always felt awkward and forced to me.
I think the game is much better with a controller. I will agree with you on that.
That might be the case, but the thing with Pyre is the controls are very frantic and loose, and the concept behind it is very silly. And when the games are more of a fun storytelling conceit, that works a lot better. As it goes along and the games get more serious, little quirks about the controls that don't work so well, those start to become really fucking annoying. And another thing about Pyre is there's so many different character types that certain animations and certain aspects of different races, you don't see them that many times throughout the entire career of playing the game. So as it goes along and it gets more challenging, more and more little moments happen where it really doesn't feel like it was my fault that I fucked up.
I always felt like it was my fault when I fucked up in that game, because once I got used to the controls, and I was playing with a controller at the time, which I tried keyboard and it felt unwieldy to me, I will admit to it. But later on, I returned to the game and I beat it on hard difficulty with keyboard as well. But once I got used to the controls, it really felt like when I was fucking up, it was because I did something explicitly wrong. It felt like a competitive match of like Dota to me, but on a much smaller scale.
And I'm sure Pyre has a higher skill ceiling, where I'm sure there are competitive Pyre players who take it very seriously and have it on lock. But for example, I lost a game at one point because I tried to jump and block with Gertrude, and she has a really wonky jump animation compared to most of the characters. And so I jittered fucking past the ball and fucked up and was in the wrong place in the arc. And I had just like barely gotten her, and there hadn't been that many witches in the game, and I didn't even know if I had seen one jump up till that point. And when shit like that happens, it feels like Pyre's desire to be whimsical and constantly changing shit is interfering with the desire to ramp up the difficulty. And that's where it started to piss me off.
It's kind of like a sports game where you have certain people which are better in different roles. Like Sir Gilliman.
No, I get that. The point is...
He's stupidly fast and he jumps really well. Like, he's a great offensive character, but putting him in defense just does not work.
I get that, but it really felt like the differences were so steep and the experience you had with them was so short before you actually got into the meat of the end game that at times it didn't feel like my fault. But the thing I wanted
to... Usually when they give you a character, they like, the first time they give you a character in general, they like give you like a bunch of time for yourself to just play around with it, like jump a bunch, do a bunch of attacks, like throw ball a couple of times, whatever, and then you get into the match where the characters actually play.
Yeah, that's awesome. Pyre has less than 30 matches in the entire game, where when you jump over the Hades, if I get to 32 heat with Hades and I'm fucking up, I've already killed over 10,000 enemies at that point. So it just feels a little more honest.
That is fair.
And I'm partially being whiny, but
also you have to consider that Pyre is ultimately a game with an actual ending.
Yeah, that's true. I will say, out of all the games, Pyre, I think I would still say, is the best game. Where Transistor, I just didn't like it that much. I think Transistor really should have been a movie or TV show, or a walking simulator with no combat. I think a Soma option with Transistor would not quite because of things like the Sybil fight, but would almost be good. Hades fails as a game, and we can get into this in a second because the longer you play Hades, the worse it gets. Pyre really felt like a good game in that it was a cohesive experience. And my biggest problem with Pyre was if the first half of Pyre was symmetrical to the second half of Pyre, Pyre probably would have been one of my favorite games of all time. The fact that Pyre gets bogged down in the cycle of just saying, go do this 18 more times, then come back and get the ending, that's when Pyre started pissing me off. But still, as a whole, I'd say Pyre's probably the best one.
As a person who, firmly considers Pyre their probably favorite game of all time, I want to say something very demeaning about the game.
Fuck you. Oh, I thought you were going to tell me to die.
Go die, Green. But anyway, about Pyre. Why would I tell you that?
I don't know.
What?
Because I was insulting Pyre.
So what? Okay. I insult you all the time. I still love you.
Okay. I thought you were mad. But okay.
No. Anyway, fucking that came out of nowhere. Anyway, the biggest problem I have with Pyre is its ending, because it's fucking amazing, but they ruin it themselves. It's like the fucking Lord of the Rings. There are just too many of them. In a sense that when you finish the game, there's just characters. There are just characters on the screen now. They just stand there and you can walk up to the character and you can talk to them, and instead it just says what happens to them after the game has ended in a wall of text. And there could have been a better way to do that. There must have been a better way to do that. That seems like just time-constrained things, and probably mismanagement on their part. That was really anticlimactic part to the end. And what happens afterward is the best thing in Supergiant history, because afterwards you walk into the light and it ends with a ballad where the entirety of the song is composed of the things you did into the game. The ballad is composed about the things you did in the fucking game, and it's great! It sings about the characters you like, how they ascended, and how they did when they ascended, and about the characters that you were left with, and how they... It's basically the same shit, but without text! And it's so good! It pisses me off. Hi, Green. How you doing?
Yeah, that is one thing that Supergiant does extremely well. Not the ending. That sounds like it sucked. But Supergiant...
The ending was brilliant, but the part that was good, and then there's just a block of text there for no reason.
But Supergiant is incredible at using music, and not just having good music, but using music to construct compelling set pieces. Did you actually get to the ending of Hades? The when the lady comes.
I got out one time when there was a lady that came out and said some stuff to Zagreus, "Oh, I'm your mother. Oh, I'm your son." Yeah. Hey. And then he dies there.
Well, when they resolve that, Orpheus and Eurydice, the musician and his muse, who have been side characters throughout the entire thing, during the credits sequence, they sing a song called In the Blood, which is incredible, and it's such a good ending. And Supergiant, each of the games, Transistor actually upplays this quite a bit, because the conceit of that game's plot is that Red was an entertainer, so you actually do get to hear her sing at various points. But all three of the games I played, it's not just that they have good songs, it's that they'll almost be like an anime. They will craft a scenario, get to this really pitched emotional moment, and then use the song perfectly.
It's incredible. The way they use their aesthetics to directly bind it into gameplay is second to none. Just Now all I can think of is the fucking Transistor, where you like, it's this first scene, your first major boss battle with Sybil, the one you got to, and you walk out on the stage from the back scene, and there's this long catwalk, and then you walk up to the microphone, and you press the hum button, and your character starts to hum into the song as it continues. It like shifts its tone slightly, but it continues exactly where it was, and you start humming into it. And then it transitions into a cutscene where you're still humming.
You mean it transistors into a cutscene?
And then I will
sorry.
offer. I will.
I'm sorry. Keep going.
I need a moment. You know what's the worst part about this pod? I'm disappointed that I didn't make it.
Yeah.
Because it was really bad, and now I'm just all I can think of is resistor pods now, and fucking. I have engineering degree now. I'm trying to translate parts of the fucking schemes into English to make puns in my head, and it's not even intentional.
I get it. You don't want to resist, but you need to calm down. You should sit down and close your eyes and say Om for a while and meditate.
I was gonna use Om to do humming. God damn you!
you need to get on my level, but you just don't have the capacity.
You use my bad puns in the worst way.
Yeah, I know. I just ram them in.
I'm rubbing off on you in the worst way possible, and it makes me kind of feel good.
Ah, that's funny. I will say about the
I'm making you a worse person, and I am proud of it.
You couldn't.
So anyway, what I was saying. So what happens in the cutscene? You hum, and then you transition into the cutscene still humming. And it tones down a little, and then you press a button, and you go into a song as it shows you the small, like, very limitedly animated, but still incredibly stylized and clear cutscene of what has happened as Red is singing, and then it goes back into a scene, and the boss is singing the song now.
The thing about Supergiant songs, and especially that scene in Transistor you just said, so much of the music is diegetic. They're big moments of music. It's almost always someone actually singing or playing the music in the world.
Like the Bard in Pyre.
Like the Bard in Pyre.
He literally was in your carriage.
And not just that, they save him. He doesn't break out his lute all the time. His big moment of being musical is during the Liberation Rites, which are basically these high-pressure boss battles, where him and the Temple Guardian, who have an implicit relationship, they break into a duet and they give a background to the fight that's going on. That is a really hype moment, and the reason that works is because is his name Tariq? Do you say it Tariq?
Yes, his name is Tariq, and it's something I wanted to say because his name is Tariq, which is like Moon, I think, or Morning Star. I'm not entirely sure about that part. And then the other character is Solaire, the woman, which is like sun and moon, and they have aesthetics, and they are colored together, and they sing with each other the song. Oh my god! And there's so many details like that in these games. It's incredible.
That is weird, where I think a big problem with Supergiant is they don't have restraint. They don't know when to say, oh, that's enough of a good thing, except with Transistor. They did it with Transistor.
Oh no, I disagree with you so strongly. Out of all the games, you say Transistor is not bloated, but lore-wise, it has more than Hades
that doesn't
and
fucking
Pyre
count.
Combined.
If it's optional and you have to go out of your way to look for it, the Easter eggs don't count as bloat.
Look, lore-wise, that game is so bloated, it's ridiculous.
It's not bloated because it doesn't take up your attention or your time. My problem with Pyre, and also Hades, although in a very different way, is fucking time to good stuff ratio where it doesn't need to be that way. In terms of efficiency, this is my problem with Pyre. This is my problem with Hades. Pyre lures you in with these really good character interactions, and then it locks them around this other stuff that you have to sit through to get there. And it's almost like you have a block of time where you know you're only going to enjoy about 20% of it, at least if you're me at that part in the game. But you have to sit through all this unnecessary stuff. Then Hades does something which on the surface isn't nearly as bad, but goes to extreme lengths, where Hades gets you addicted to a gameplay loop that compels you to keep going, and then it never gives you a satisfying ending. And it just goes forever and forever and forever.
This is my problem with Hades, where...
This is my problem with Hades, too.
I like gameplay so much, but here's the thing. When I play Pyre, I have my own quests there. The main quest, it is there, and it's kind of like provided there, but it's kind of fucking somewhere in the background. I never pay attention to it. When I play Pyre, I play it because I want to experience the characters, and these are my quests. The ones I've taken out for myself.
Thupa, I need to ask. I think this is one thing where if you differ with me on this, there's just no bridging this gap. In Pyre, the fact that you frequently had to watch lengthy, time-consuming, pre-rendered animations that were repeated over and over and over again, just in your routine going through the loop and getting to the next battle, did that annoy you? Because if that did not annoy you, then I think you fundamentally cannot be annoyed by the shit that annoyed me in Pyre.
You mean ones like a tent coming together and then going up and like transitioning between screens?
Stuff like that, yeah, where every time you get to a new place, you have to click in one landing location, then you click on another part of the map and you watch the carriage roll up to it. Then when you go to the Liberation Rite, you click on the temple gateway, have to watch the gateway come down, watch the thing go into the gateway, watch the same goddamn conversation that happens every fucking time. Then when you win the Liberation Rite, it's like a 45-second sequence of watching your person float up to the Commonwealth world, and it's the same every goddamn time. The only thing that made it good once is when you do it with Ruki, he's spinning like an idiot, and that was funny. Because Ruki's a dumbass.
He's a dumbass with a heart of gold.
I guess. With a tooth of gold, too. The heart runs to his
Did he end up with mustache in your playthrough?
I had to get rid of Ruki fairly early, so I didn't get to see it like get huge, but he did have mustache. And when I say restraint is what would make these games good, Hades was almost the greatest game of all time. The whole first half of Hades, which I guess for me, actually, it was my first run getting to and killing Hades, I guess, or at least most of it, was this incredibly tight experience where the dialogue is so good and you can get it so quickly. The house is not that big. You just dash around, chat with people. It doesn't overstay its welcome. You get really good dialogue, really good characters, really good story. You get it in a little burst. Then you're in the gameplay. The gameplay is snappy and fun and fast. And you get the interactions with the gods when you get the boons, which for the whole first section of the game, the boon interactions are hilarious and awesome. And the characterization of the gods is really fucking good. They feel like real gods. They're funny. They play off each other in interesting ways. You're never getting bogged down with Hades. The most that Hades ever fucks you with is watching the animation of you standing there while the boon unfolds, which that annoyed me. That was enough to annoy me, where you're watching whole fucking action sequences of people floating around and are fine with it. Hades is so quick. The dialogue is so good. It feels like a constant escalation. You're getting stronger every time. Every run, you get something you can take back with you and you can get further next time. Hades is so efficient in how it delivers this escalating sequence with hilarious characters, intriguing story, all this great shit that is ramping towards a conclusion that you know you can get at any time, at any moment. You can break through and kill Hades if you're good enough. And then after that, Hades breaks down into this exponential expansion where you just keep going, and you get the same boons so many times that you get bored of the gods. You start exhausting dialogue where it's obviously dialogue options that are B tier, where they just needed more, they're not that interesting, or they're treading the same ground over and over. And it keeps going, and the charm wears off. And it can easily take you 5 times as long to get through that second section after you've exhausted most of the content as it does the first, where there's this really crazy escalation. And if they would have made it so that feeling of rapid progress and constant learning continued from beginning to end with a clear ending, Hades would have been the best game ever. But it turns into this meandering bullshit where the mechanics are still there, but everything that made it so special is not.
Yeah, it definitely suffers from its inherent structure. It is a problem. And another thing with the game that was a problem for me is that I really come to Supergiant games for this narrative element. And yeah, I enjoyed gameplay of Hades a lot, but what I would usually just do is I would just pick Shield because I found it the most consistent. And then I would just play with Shield. And I didn't feel like experimenting in that game, despite the fact that it was encouraging me to. And I didn't feel like knowing more about the world, because it was just Greek mythology, and I can read that, sure.
Did you not like the characters in Hades?
I liked the characters a lot, but I just genuinely did not care much about the world, where in Transistor, the world is a character. In Bastion, it is fucking nonsense, and it's fed to you in such small drips that you just can't help but wonder. And I literally created a D&D campaign based on the world of Pyre.
That is true. Part of my problem with Transistor was I just don't like the world nearly as much. Pyre, that's what the inside of my brain looks like. The fucking the star symbol, that's how you boot me up in the morning.
Also, you were like saying that those 45-second animation of somebody being lifted up annoyed you. For me, every time somebody lifted up, it was a character that I liked that left me. It was heart-wrenching.
That was a thing. I was so bummed. And after I realized that was the mechanic, my entire play style was just based around having Jodie as long as possible.
Oh my god, Jodariel.
She's just the best character. If you don't know, she's a 7... In the world of Pyre, if you're in the banished underworld for, 12 years or so, yeah, if you're in Downside for a long time, your body starts changing. I think you get bigger, but you turn into a demon and horns come out your head. And one of the first characters you meet is Jodariel, who's this very serious, pretty, 7-foot-tall, intense demon lady with strong arms and giant horns coming out of her head. She's just the best character immediately. That's actually a weird aspect of Pyre, where with Transistor, I really believe, and you can argue with me all day, I think the fact that the characters weren't nearly as interesting was a big downside with Transistor, where even if you like them, it's retroactive in most cases. They don't have a lot of agency. I just didn't find them that interesting. In Pyre, the characters are incredible, but also you don't always have access to them, or you have to play it more than one time to get all their interactions, I think. And in Hades, the characters are awesome, and you get everything they have to offer, but then they overstay their welcome because the game lasts forever.
Yeah. I think they did the character interaction best in Pyre, in my opinion.
I think there was a version of Pyre that I would have loved, where they cut out some of the shit and they found a way to give the game more replay value. I just could not get over the way that it was structured, where I really crave... I don't play mini video games because I am fucking horrible with attention span. And with Pyre, I felt compelled to listen to the audio because music and dialogue was such a big part of it. I normally listen to podcasts and audiobooks when I'm playing video games. So if I'm going to really pay attention, I need an efficient feed of information, which early on Hades was incredible for, and then went completely the hell. Pyre early on was pretty good, but then I started seeing the same shit over and over, and I feel like there's a version of Pyre where that early cadence kept up the whole time that I would have loved. And I liked Pyre, but it just ended up pissing me off.
It's also not an uncommon sentiment. It's definitely like... It's more of a visual novel where you have to expect that it's gonna waste some of your time, but it does it in such a stylish and a clean way where it feels like it belongs in the world. So I loved every moment of it.
I will say, thematically, I'm a guy who likes his themes. Transistor, I feel like it was all about the aesthetic with that game.
Holy shit.
What?
Transistor and aesthetics is... It's... Like, I've mentioned how they parcel out story to you by having you use abilities in different manners. But the story of Transistor is a fucking... It's a puzzle. It's a puzzle that has no clear conclusion to it, and a lot of intuitive guessing is required despite the amount of reading you will have to do to get there. Alright, I'm gonna tell it. I'm gonna tell it how I understand. If you don't understand it the same way, if you don't agree with me, or if it's a spoiler that you want to avoid, fucking skip a bit further.
I don't care about Transistor that much. You mean the audience? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, keep going.
So Transistor is a game that happens inside of a transistor. It is a game about a cycle where everything begins with you pulling out a sword, and then it ends with Red stabbing herself with the exact same sword and going deeper a level. It is a game where in this world there's a city of Cloudbank that people change by voting on shit they want. You want to break from one part of the city to another one? Vote for it. Enough people voted? It is now done. It is just there. Operators make it happen through some fucking voodoo magic sci-fi shit. Or it just appears on its own. It's never clarified. And then there's just so much there. But basically, the entire playthrough as you go through the city where people change the color of the fucking sky by saying they wanted green or peach colored. There are small symbols that are hidden there. The white mechanisms. I don't remember the name for them. Fucking escapes as names usually do. Me, myself. Anyway. They have the transistor eye on them. And then when you get to the end and you fight Roy as you inside of the transistor now, a layer deeper in the world made of a bunch of different transistors where there are cocoons with people in them, and when you go into the spatial mode where you stop time and plan out your moves, you can see people inside of them. It's brilliant. And what's another thing about it, God, the character in this game, Red, she dies at the end. She kills herself with Transistor. And then she ends in a village. After the titles, she's standing in a field of rye on a farm. And the way the people of the Cloudbank refer to the afterlife is the farm. You go on a farm. You go outside of the city, and you never return. And this is where they end up after she stabs herself. There's so much there. Like, there's hours worth of debate here on what has happened and what is there, what is real, how this world functions. It's fascinating. It's a lot of high concept sci-fi. It's kind of it reminds me of the Quantum Thief trilogy a lot. Anyway, Green, I'm going off the rails. You need to rein me in. Be my showstopper.
Yeah, I said hey, let me talk about the themes of these games real quick. And then Thupa was like, hold on, I have to explain the plot of Transistor for a few minutes.
Look, I just find it so fascinating.
I'm sure you do. Anyways, Transistor really doesn't have... Well, fuck, now I'm going to get argued with. Transistor, at least early on, doesn't really have ideas, it seems. There doesn't seem to be a theme so much. If there is, it's delivered almost entirely through the aesthetic, or it's set up for later. Pyre I found more interesting, where parts of the aesthetic and the lore kind of fed into themes a little bit, where I like the fact that you have the little Bible that is allegedly what the civilization above you is founded on as a sort of religious text. I find it interesting that the characters are down in a purgatory place, and when they fight and gain experience, it's described as them gaining enlightenment. You have to gain enlightenment to go up. Where there's these crazy mystical aspects, but also the civilization above them, which is allegedly founded on this, is obviously very corrupt. And I find it interesting that if you look at their Bible, mercy as a foundational virtue for this civilization comes up over and over and over again. And a lot of the characters you meet have been thrown down there in an alleged act of mercy, when in reality, many of them didn't really do anything wrong, or would have preferred to die, or they're there for corrupt reasons. I just found aspects of that really interesting. And Hades, I think, has some interesting themes going on in the grind, the progress. The fact that Hades gets to a point where you are fighting your way out of hell to talk to someone for 2 or 3 minutes, die, and then do it again, where you're having a conversation that, by all logic, should take 10 minutes to complete. That is such a profound little statement about tenacity and keeping the shit. And again, like a lot of things, that's real life. Sometimes you get absurdly small amounts of progress for doing shit, like let's say, a couple hundred views on a podcast or something, which is ruining your life with stress. But you're trapped in a grind, and you don't always know if what you're doing is valuable. I love that Sisyphus is there. I love that Sisyphus is just hanging out, being a crazy but nice weird guy, giving you fun advice. And the main character in Sisyphus and the player in their actual life are all doing the same thing. I find that really interesting, and that's a fun little thing you get from Hades, which not a lot of games offer. Where one of my favorite games, Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy, very similar in that regard. Oh, fuck, whatever.
Look, that game made me furious, and so that game is structured.
Life is terrible. The game is like life. That's the point,
game is structured by a fucking maniac. It is structured in such a clever, devious manner where you fail once and you just go to the fucking beginning.
That's how life works.
I hated
that. Might even be how the afterlife works. You might just be reborn as a baby or a cockroach or something if you die.
I don't believe in the afterlife. There's no such thing.
Anyway. Well, see, why are you playing video games with afterlife themes then? All these games are about death, Thupa.
Why do I like Lane?
Yeah, why do you like? Because we all like Lane. We all like Lane.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We all love Lane.
I know this is not a Lane cast, but Lane would be horrible if she didn't have the bear suit. It would be the most pretentious, like, sucking yourself off of a TV show ever. But the bear suit saves it. But
she's very adorable.
But that's a thing. Really, every Supergiant game is about death, in a way. But I guess everything's about death when you think about it. But, Bastion is about there's an apocalypse and they're trying to get it going. Transistor is, well, I guess Transistor, it's coping with the fact that the world doesn't exist, kind of. And
it's very existential, yeah.
Pyre is very obviously, if not an allegory, it draws from the ideas and symbolism of purgatory.
Well, I mean, they are literally sent to hell, in a sense.
Yeah, but they can get out, and there is a kind of
redemption thing. To be tried and tested, and like one person out of however many, and you have to be like chosen on a team and win and be chosen by that team to you're basically you don't have any chance. It's a society that exists purely on a belief that is there, that works, but is structured in such a way so as to let as few people as humanly possible out.
That, yeah, it really do be like that. And then Hades is just about spending eternity doing the same shit, which sometimes I think that's what we're doing. It was actually Hades. Hades got to me at a few points. Hades had some pathos. There was the Hercules thing where Hades, the god, gets all pissed and said, humans are full of shit with who they worship. Hercules should be right next to Sisyphus getting tortured, but because the gods are assholes, he's on Olympus fucking whores and drinking ambrosia. And by whores, I mean Aphrodite. Oh, when I made that joke right now, in the back of my head, a little part of me was like, oh, fuck, what if the Greek gods are real and they heard that? That's how loose my connection to reality has gotten. I am occasionally afraid of the Greek gods.
I am your crowd. I am the person who believes in none of that shit.
Yeah. We'll get there sometime. The
fucking
hell. We'll do Technolize someday if you're ever up to it.
I'm scared.
I know. Well, you should be. Life is scary, as Technolize taught us. Other places in
what Technolize teaches us is exactly the opposite.
Hey! Do the video. Do the video.
I'm glad that you stopped me before I really got into it, because it's just.
If anyone's curious, we went through a whole fucking arc of Thupa wanting to do Technolize, then not wanting to do Technolize because it had to be the perfect final emitting of psychic analytical spunk into the universe right before he perished from the earth.
I've seen this show. I've rewatched it last week, and you know how many times I've seen it by now? 37 times. I've seen this anime more than I've seen anime in the last 2 years, probably.
That's almost true of me as well, and I've only watched it once. We'll get the Technolize. We're someday we'll do the trilogy of Haibane Renne Technolize Lane. But if you can ever bring yourself to talk about the perfection that is Technolize while I sit here,
it is not perfect for sure, but god damn is that it's just the most impactful piece of artwork that I've experienced in my life.
But talking about.
Look, I'm gonna say a really quick thing, alright?
Sure you are.
One big thing about Technolize, though, is it's when you watch it, not how you watch it. Because if that shit lands at the correct time and the correct mind space, you're gonna love it despite its failings. But if you're not there for it, you're just not gonna like it.
Yeah, for example, if you wait for the actual technological apocalypse to happen and then you watch Technolize, it's going to be really pressing and relevant.
Probably gone by that. Gone completely into obscurity that it deserves.
But in terms of the themes of death and stuff, there's a speech blurb with Zagreus where he is talking to Achilles and he makes the comment, "Oh, wow, mortals know that when they die, they get to come down here and be with us. Their lives must be so full of meaning and comfort, knowing that this home is waiting for them after they die. It must be great to be human. And that was like a kick right in the fucking balls. It's like, yeah, that sounds so nice. I wish I was in this video game world. You get to die and hang out with Zagreus. That's cool. And here's the thing. We're going to get into this if we ever cover Seventh Seal, but the certainty of having something like the Hades framework in Greek mythology, that's almost more important than whether or not it's positive. Because, plenty of people are in actual hell in Hades, or, in Tartarus. But having a sense of knowledge and knowing what's going on, that probably was cool. And that's something I really like about Hades, where it comes off as very charming in that way, where the rank and file dead people are not the focus of Hades. But there's something kind of wholesome about the fact that everyone in Hades is so diligent about running the afterlife. It focuses on Zag. Zag is the only person there not contributing. Everyone else is trying to do their job. Where it's almost like the House of Hades is an institution, and Hades is trying to facilitate a nice, pleasant afterlife for everyone. Where Hades is an asshole, he is very good at what he does, and a lot of good comes of it. So I find that endearing.
He's like a Satan. He's not a good dude.
Yeah, yes, he is.
He cares, about his family, sure, but, if you die and go into Hades as a mortal, you're not gonna hang out with Zagreus. You're gonna boil in a fucking kettle.
If you go to Tartarus, if you go to, hell, but most of the shades are in Asphodel, which is, it's fiery, but I don't think it hurts. It's just kind of boring. And if you're good, you can go to the Elysium Fields and watch Theseus get killed by Zagreus.
I don't know, but that's entertaining enough. Probably gonna start wearing you after 30-second try.
Unlike Technolyze, which goes on. That would be Thupa's preferred afterlife. He gets to watch Technolyze over and over and over again.
I wouldn't mind it.
But no, Hades, the character of Hades is probably one of the best characters in the whole thing. And, let's get into him a bit. I really like Hades as a character. I find him incredibly sympathetic. Where if you look at Hades, it seems like Hades does a good job with basically everything in his life except for Zagreus. Where he seems very diligent, he tries very hard to run things. In terms of being one of the Greek gods, it seems like he is easily the best out of them, except for maybe Athena or Hermes a little bit by implication. Where he's very responsible, he's very sober. I think if you eliminate his relationship with Zagreus, Hades is a little strict, but he's not a bad guy at all, I think.
I don't think he's a bad person. I just fucking... he's just Hades. Their father-son relationship is, I would say, it's tight, and there's a lot of issues there, but it's just common for Greek mythos in general. There's a lot of shit that families do to each other in, Greek god mythos that just sucks. Isn't that right?
Yeah, well, it's a very cleaned up version of Greek mythology, kind of, where everyone being arrogant and meddlesome and causing problems for no reason, that's still there. It's just not as intense. And Hades even brings up several times to Zagreus that what he dealt with growing up and the family shit that he deals with on a regular basis is so much worse than anything Zagreus has ever experienced that it makes it hard to get too judgmental of Hades, where Hades did have to kill his parents, and he did lose the lot to Zeus and Poseidon. He did have to go down, and he was ignored in the underworld, where Hades, the game, is very open about acknowledging that Greek mythology is a really rough, arbitrary place. And that's almost kind of the point of the character, I think, where Hades is sheltering Zagreus to a large degree from the horrors that is ancient religion, and Zagreus is misunderstanding it, and to a large extent that's Hades' fault, but I think that does add to the sympathy, where the only reason we get to have this fun, poppy, empathetic version of Greek mythology is because we're with Hades the character and not dealing with Zeus directly or anything like that.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I am not very good with, like, fucking names and Greek mythos in general. I should know better. Like, I genuinely should, because I use that shit in D&D campaigns, but somehow I'm not. It's troublesome.
I'll ask, the gods that show up in Hades, what did you think about them in general? The boon characters. How did you feel about them? Did you have any favorites?
I hated Hermes.
I didn't like Hermes either. Later on, you realize his boons are actually pretty good, but yeah.
He's so annoying. Chaos, though. Chaos is pretty good.
Chaos is the best character. Because that's how the world actually works. Hades is teaching us.
What do you mean? Wait. Do you mean, like, the fact that, if we believe the Greek mythology that everything starts from chaos and then titans and then gods, whatever? Is that what you mean?
Yes, mostly. Chaos is real.
I mean, yes. Entropy is real.
I think no, not even just entropy, where in the actual ancient Greek conception of cosmology, chaos was this surrounding state of nothingness and void where you could not perceive it as an ordered place. It was fundamentally impossible. And cosmos, which we live in, is the extracted from chaos thing that can be perceived. And I think that's how reality actually works. I think chaos exists, and infinity and undefined existence exists, and then something extracts parts of it that we can perceive, and then we're here. Like, I think that Greek mythology is basically right.
Does that mean there's a goddess that makes rainbows?
Maybe.
I like that.
I mean more the basics. Like, I don't know if there's a guy with a beard. By the way, one of the best things about Hades was his bitchy attitude about, like, Zeus. Where one of his best quotes is when he's talking to Zagreus in the exit screen. He says, "Zeus, you want to know about my brother Zeus? Imagine me with a luscious mane of white hair and not a shred of restraint." Which is a great quote. But you liked Chaos. I think Chaos is the best character. I found him so fucking interesting and funny and compelling.
You can pet the pup.
What?
I like how Cerberus. You could pet the puppy.
Cerebus or whatever. Yeah, he was great as well.
Cerberus.
I love him.
I like Haran because he just makes noises at you and acts smug.
Yeah, it was funny that he never talked. Who was the sleepy guy? Hypnos, the wisecracker. I found Hypnos fucking annoying. Dusa, I think she was a bit of a meme, but, you know, she was all right still.
Dusa was the best character. If you went on the fucking Twitter, everybody loved Dusa.
That's it. Dusa was a very memeable character. I don't know if she was that interesting.
Because she was great. She was like, one, she was a literal pun. One, she was a literal pun. Two, she was a little flying head because somebody cut her head off. I don't remember who. And then she's just funny. She's just fun and funny and adorable and caring. And
there just wasn't enough to her for me to talk to her all that often. I like most of the other characters. I think Chaos is the best. Hades is very good. Zagreus is very good. Of the boon gods, it was really frustrating where I wanted to like Artemis and I wanted to like her boons, but I eventually was confronted with the reality that her boons just weren't that good. You think they're going to be good, but the crit damage just doesn't matter. But then every time I went the Ares route, I didn't want to do that because it seemed too obvious. Oh, the god of war, I bet he's good. Ares is just like the best guy. I
did tend to pick up a lot of his, yeah.
And especially the Ares god gauge, you can almost kill Hades' second form in one fucking move if you charge up the God Gauge during his first form.
I feel like Poseidon is kind of gimmicky.
Poseidon was hilarious because he has the most fun boons, but it's really easy to get trapped late game without doing enough damage to really get through Hades. But if you get the legendary boon where shit bounces twice, it is the funniest thing to be in the Satyr Chambers, hit someone, and they just bounce around and hit another person, then hit another person. And I will say, voice acting in Hades. The voice acting was really good.
And it's like a limited amount of people doing this shit too. It's fantastic the lengths this studio goes to. Also, it's something we haven't like explicitly mentioned, although we have referred to it on many occasions, but this game, Hades, has a stupid amount of dialogue. A stupid amount of dialogue. There's so much.
I think it's
so
fine.
Much people talking.
I think it's fine.
I'm not complaining.
Oh.
I'm not complaining. Don't misunderstand me. But there's so much work put there, and it's just a marvel. The lengths they go to.
It is, and that's part of why it really hurts when you start running out of the good ones, as you're on your 50th run out of Hades. That's when it starts to become a drag, because early on you feel like you're learning about the gods and their personalities so much, and there's so many fun jokes, but eventually it just wears off. I
feel like you have to play like this game in a different manner, where you have to set yourself a limit and say, this is where I'm gonna finish it, because if you just keep going, you have an ending where you just exhaust things and then you play it until you're tired of the game, and the overall experience is diminished in your head, where when you play to the end of Pyre or Transistor, you get an ending and you can go, and that's it. The game is done.
Yeah, it was really frustrating because with Hades, when I finished it the first time, or especially when I first killed Hades, the character, Hades was a 9.5 at least. It was an incredible game. It was one of my favorite things ever. And if it had ended there, it would have been maybe felt a bit short, but it would have been perfect. But the longer you play Hades, the worse it gets, where Hades is down to almost being like a 7 now. And I play it all the time. I keep deleting it from my computer, compulsively re-downloading it, then playing it all day because it's so addictive. And the thing about Hades, the early part of Hades, where everything is ramping up and you have this crazy sense of progress, that is what gets you addicted to the gameplay. Then you get to a point where you just play Hades because you play Hades, but the progress is not there anymore, and it makes you hate yourself. And every time I go back to Hades, I play until I kill Hades the 9th time, and I get the song, and then I restart. Because that early part where your character is getting stronger every time you get darkness, that's what's really good about Hades. Once you hit the point where you're just playing Hades to play Hades, you eventually realize you're not working towards anything anymore.
And that is why you should play Necopara.
Yeah, you're always working towards something on Necopara. And I will say,
there's a conclusion there.
One of my favorite games. Oh, there is? Oh, that's cool. I guess.
Yeah, everyone is like a small story.
Come? Oh.
And you can come. Yeah, there's H-rated content there.
I will say, one of my favorite games of all time is FTL, the space combat game.
Hey, have you tried Halcyon 6?
No, I have not. But
it's kind of FTL-ish, but not really. I think you might like it. Give it a try when it's on sale.
We will talk about it later. I kept thinking back to FTL when I was playing Hades, because they're both roguelikes. Hades is a little more complex because the character does get stronger every time. And I kept thinking about why one worked, and I revisit FTL pretty often, and every time I play FTL, I have fun. Where Hades became a drag after a while, and I kept trying to figure out what the deal was, and I think it's two things. One, FTL is very easy to restart. You can just hit two hotkeys and you're back at the beginning of the run and you can go. And if you're having a bad run with FDL and you realize I'm not going to be able to kill the ship at the end, you could realize that about 5 or 10 minutes into a run. It is not that long. And restarting is a painless, quick process, and you can move very, very quickly. With Hades, you sometimes realize around the time you're nearing the end of Asphodel, you realize that you don't have the right boons to win, or you're almost certainly not going to get there. And early on, that's not so bad, because your character got stronger getting through Asphodel. But once you hit the point where it stops being about progress and becomes entirely, can I kill Hades? There's no real point to keep playing if you realize you're not going to be strong enough once you get out of Elysium, if you even get that far. And going back, it costs you so much in terms of the choices you've made, the time you've put in, the animations you've watched, the emotional investment, the thought you've put into it. The fact that Hades does not have a mechanism for starting quickly and eventually loses the fact that it gives you progress on failed runs, it causes this dead zone where it's too much investment to be quick and snappy, but you're also not making progress. And that's where Hades really falls apart for me, I think. And looking back at FDL made me realize what was wrong there.
Fair enough. It's something we've brought up before, but I think there's no real way to fix it because of how intertwined narrative is with the gameplay of Hades. Like two are one and the same. And while it makes your first experience incredible, your returning experience is diminished because of it. It's just a matter of fact.
I think it was a failure of discipline. I think they should have just had a point where they said, the game is over. You can play it again if you want, but the game is over.
Man.
Or alternatively, they could have kept it open-ended in a way where it was clear they're going to add more content later. And this is a big problem with Hades that I will say is kind of I think we're wrapping up, but one of the things with Hades that bugs me is the additional content they put towards the end and the stuff they put to try to stretch it out. It makes you feel compelled to do it, but they didn't think it through. And to an extent, Pyre does this as well, just not nearly as bad. The Pact of Punishment, it is not this careful re-examination of the mechanics or anything like that. Most of the Pact is just making numbers bigger. It's just them going onto the clock of the script for the enemies and increasing the speed of everything, or it's increasing damage. It wasn't this carefully constructed experience. It was just a brute force way of making the game harder without maintaining playability. And so it's not fun and it's not interesting, but you feel like a little bitch if you don't do it. The fact that I still don't have the 32 heat Skelly statue still bugs me, even though that is a pathetic fucking reward that is totally meaningless after everything I went through, 20 hours ago.
Look, the way you need to treat those things is just different in my opinion, because difficulty is there as your comfort zone. It's not, you can challenge yourself if you feel like it, but there's an intended experience and the developers will put all of their resources in balancing the game around that experience. If there are other difficulty options, they are there for people who want to experience the game in a different manner, but I don't think it is reasonable to demand for developers to structure a game in 3 different manners on easy, medium, and difficult separately. It's just not a feasible front of work.
Well, maybe that's the case, but the fact that they put those rewards out there made them feel like you were supposed to do them. And I will say
it's an optional thing.
And here's the thing. Early on, I didn't really know if that was the case. And to an extent, maybe I should have just went on to Reddit and asked everyone. But right after you get the ending where the queen comes back and you get the music and all that, they drop these new things in front of you and imply that there's more story you can get. Where I think the devs should have been a little more upfront with the fact that the rewards you were getting were arbitrary and not that interesting, that the game really was over, and this is all bonus content for streamers. Where there was a time when I really believed, oh, if I get that third Skelly statue, I bet I get a really cool hidden ending, or I unlock a bonus level. And then I realized,
just a little bonus thing.
There just should have been a pop-up box that says, this is for Twitch people, you don't have to do this.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Honestly, that would be nice.
Because I actually believed I was supposed to do it for a while, not realizing that it was a total waste. Do you have any...
Well, that seems like it. We've talked for pretty much 2 hours.
I have one more thing to say really quick that we will end on. This is a thing about Hades that I think is obviously a big part of why it blew up, where Hades is a great game. I don't think Hades is so much better than Pyre that the huge disparity in sales between the two and recognition between the two makes sense. Because as a game, I do think Pyre is better. But Hades did a few things brilliantly. One, it marketed to the streaming people really well, where it's a game that works really well with things like Twitch, and it lends itself to complex runs where people are just showing how big their dick is.
It's just a mainstream kind of game.
And the other thing Hades did is it had insane sex appeal with fucking fan artists going crazy with the goddamn characters.
Oh my god.
And they got so much Twitter heat of people wanting Zag to fuck Thanatos, to fuck Meg, to fuck Aphrodite. There are so many characters that were just so memeable, Dusa, for example, that I think it was very smart that they did that, because it's so easy to do fan art of these things. This
game was literally a perfect storm, where it is a fourth game of a very beloved studio that was highly like advertised by Total Biscuit when he was alive, and celebrated in the smaller and bigger parts of the community. And at one point they made a deal with Epic Store where they would only sell their game for like a year or 2 years on Epic Store exclusively and not on Steam. And it was right around the time when Epic was getting into a lot of trouble for that. Like buying off smaller developers, offering them unreasonable amounts of money to only sell on their platform and not on Steam. And that's also why the game kind of blew up. And there's an occult following for the studio, and there's a lot of publicity, and there was a lot of hype about the game from the people who played it. And it's just a perfect storm of events.
Okay, that all makes sense.
Oh, and yeah, it's just a genuinely more mainstream game where it's a challenging, kind of competitive feeling roguelike that a lot of people just like. And while it is heavily narrative is fed to you in a manner that you don't have to read. Which Pyre, you have to read a lot. It's not a game that appeals to everybody, but those people who will like it will like it. And if you like any of the Supergiant's games, you will like Hades, at least a lot. It's a good game. It's not my favorite, but it's a good one.
It was briefly my favorite, and then it slowly drifted down to being pretty good. I do stand by my comparison with Pyre, although I will say Jody is way more attractive than anyone in Hades, and that is the reason Pyre is better.
Jodariel is the best character. And you know what? You know why Pyre is just a better game in general, in my opinion?
Because Jodariel is in it.
More. Because gay weed. Not here.
Yay.